let's talk more about satin line options. We have selected uh, the manual option, and we're going to set that back to false, which will put it back into auto mode. But there's another way to actually get this to be even without actually going to the manual mode. You can select a different satin edit type, which will set to line, and then basically what happens is the curves, instead of being curves, lines are approximated for the inside and outside. Now you notice that things get bunched up here, which is maybe not what we want. And we can change that by making this manual as well, and we can move some of these points. Which will spread that out. Now, this is kind of tricky stuff, and I don't know if this is really that desirable to do it this way, but you could do this instead. And basically all these lines end up being endpoint controllers, just like I described before. And if you change this, you can make this different by actually getting the curve closeness to a higher value, and I'll use less lines. I generally don't like this because I like to use the curves instead, but this is another option. There's some cases where this might be desirable. In particular, this is really useful when you're just doing a box. So if we were going to do a box like this, let's say, with satin. In this case, everything is a line already, so it might be desirable to actually use the line function instead of the curve function. Essentially, they don't actually do much different, but you can see that this is right. So actually, this doesn't really change anything. Sorry about that. I thought it did. So I'm not sure you ever want to use the line function because it kind of makes the heart look bad. But you can play around with it and decide yourself which one you like better. You can see that the lines, the satin lines, get controlled by the endpoints on this object. Now, there's some other settings in this menu which, when you're in auto mode, get affected. Some of these menu options, if you go to the curve option and use that instead, you can get pretty much all the options the same as you have here. But here we can change the satin inside and the satin outside, and basically change the satin width to different values. And then we also have this other function called taper. Sometimes this doesn't yield great results. In this case, because it's just a line, each of these lines is the same taper thickness. And then both. This gets more interesting when you actually go and use it for something like a curved object, where you can actually play around with the tapers and see what it does. In this case, it's tapering that at the top, at the start point and end point, like that. Curve closeness, let's change that to something smaller. And so you basically get a tapering effect. You can achieve the same effect by actually setting this to auto and doing it yourself, but there are these features here that might be useful. Satin spacing basically sets how close the stitches are together. So if we increase it, you can see that there's less zigzags occurring. It's the spacing between these points. That's what that affects. Even spacing, what that does is it spaces things evenly both on the inside and outside. That one's kind of hard to explain. You might just have to play around with it and see what it does. Let's see, let's go and try it on this one. So if we change even spacing on this one, you'll notice that we have different effects. So anyway, you can play around with those and see what you get.